great to see you, Hal Hershfield. We are so excited to have you as a guest, as a featured author for this month's Intentionally in Friends book club. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you, Tina. Thanks for having me. I appreciate being here.
Oh, so excited and really appreciate you all being here as well, too. And so I have some just general housekeeping announcements that I just want to get out to our audience. And then I can't wait to dive in. Hal, this is
Sounds great.
fantastic. Oh my good.
Thanks.
You guys are in for an enormous treat and privilege today. Okay. So thank you for attending today's Intentionally in Friends book club. We are coming live to you in Intentionally Studios right outside of Philly, King of Prussia. Hey, Hal, where are you coming from today?
I'm here in Los Angeles.
Fantastic. And we've got Dr. Hal Hershfield is author of Your Future Self, How to Make Tomorrow Better. Today, it is available on Amazon, Audible, and all major book outlets. Hot off the presses, ladies and gentlemen. This book is hot. It just came out. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Tina Powell. I'm a partner, chief of community here at Intentionally. I'm joined by my colleague, Melanie Herrera Bridges, who's in the background, helping to assist with any technology issues that you're having and just helping to share the love. Yep, you guys can give Melanie lots of love in the chat. She loves that, by the way. Okay, just a quick word about our book club. It was envisioned by our CEO and co-founder, Kelly Waltrick, who wanted to create a community around authors in the financial services industry. Their expertise, their stories are something that we can all learn from and apply in our daily life, our businesses. This conversation with Hal is totally on point. You will walk away and you will learn something new and you'll be able to apply it to your life and your future self for that matter. This book club meeting is being recorded. So if you want to come back to it, if you want to share it, everyone who registered for today's event is getting a copy of that recording. And if you're having any technical issues, just send it in the chat. Again, Melanie will assist you. And questions for Hal can be sent in the questions tab. Don't forget, anybody who asks a question is automatically entered to win a $50 gift card from Amazon and a copy of Hal's book, Your Future Self. So if you're an author and you'd like to recommend an author, send it to us at bookclub@growintentionally.com. Lastly, we appreciate the courteousness of your time. Know that this program is educational in nature, so it does not apply to specific advice. And so if you need specific advice, consult with your financial advisor. So let's get right into it. Hal, before I read your bio, I can't wait to get this poll in the chat. You know, one of the things that we really find fascinating about our authors is their outside lives here. So we've got a fun fact about you, Hal. So thumbs up, everybody. Would love for you to participate. Hal participated in which competitive sport? And by the way, Hal, that there seems to be like a common theme with our book authors and sports.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll have to see. I mean, we'll have to see if people count this as a sport.
I have to see it. We appreciate all the guesses. So yeah, digging into our quantifiable selves here. So we've got three answers: tennis 31%, archery 38%, swimming 38%. So Hal, why don't you kind of kick us off? What is the answer?
It was tennis. Maybe I was trying to be misleading by saying would we count it as a sport? But all right, so it's the lowest one. There we go.
That's so much fun. Yeah, I think we picked some really fun answers. Archery, swimming. Tried to make it pretty hard. We've got a lot of smart,
I like it.
successful people in the audience today. We appreciate you guys. Big shout out to all of you today. Okay, so Hal's bio, I have to read it. Just super impressive. Hal Hershfield is a PhD. He's a professor of marketing, behavior, decision-making, and psychology at UCLA's Anderson School of Management, where he has won numerous awards for his teaching and his research. His work on future selves, the subject that we're talking about today, has received widespread attention on outlets like NPR, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, and the Atlantic, right? You can see why we're so excited about today's interview. Hal's research has also been published in prestigious business psychology and general academic journals, as well as the Harvard Business Review, Scientific American, and Psychology Today. Hal also has a really fun side. He and his wife are parents to, his wife Jennifer are parents to 2 children. And Hal, we want to put a big shout out to Brian Portnoy of Shaping Wealth.
Yeah.
Where you are an advisory board member. Thank you very much, Brian Portnoy, for introducing us to Hal and bringing us together. And Your Future Self was just published in 2023, again, hot off the presses. So Hal, congrats on the book. We're honored, absolutely thrilled today. We're a huge fan. Tell us about Our Future Selves. What sparked, what was the genesis behind the book?
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for that very generous intro. I appreciate that. Okay, the genesis for the book. I mean, it's so, in some ways, it's the research I've been working on for like almost 15 years now. And I mean, a lot of it started around the financial crisis of 2008 and 09, when I was trying to figure out, like, why is it so hard to do the things that we say we want to do? And it's, especially in the financial space. That was really the start of it. And it sort of led me down this path of saying, like, when we have a hard time with long-term decisions, it's not just financial. There's so many choices that occur in our everyday lives that have these consequences now and later. And that really got me thinking that if we want to understand something about how people make decisions, we need to understand how they think about their selves over time. And that was sort of the seed that was planted all those years ago.
I'm kind of wondering, and this is just off the top of my head,
Yeah.
as like growing up as a toddler in the teenager years, like, did you also too have this innate curiosity just about like life? I just wondered if something like that, shows up early in your own origin story.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Yeah, people called me naturally brilliant, a prodigy. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, I didn't have, so I didn't grow up with siblings. So I think I had to like sort of, find things that were interesting. The one anecdote that I think does stand out is that, I'm probably showing my age here, but I guess it's obvious. Like, I grew up, with an actual encyclopedia
Me
in our
too.
house, right? Yeah, of course. So I mean, like, it feels, it feels like if anybody was wondering if I was Gen Z or a young millennial, you would have guessed wrong. But the M book would just open to the money page, because I was fascinated by like money, like the bills and everything. Anyway, that's not really the question you were asking, but I was very curious about some financial decision making stuff from an early age.
That's so much fun. I want to blame the game Monopoly on our, like, I think, right? That was
Yeah,
probably our indoctrination to money
yeah,
and how great it felt when you had a lot of it.
yeah, yeah. No, that's exactly right. And also your first sort of exposure to like family fights.
Yeah, for sure. Right. And rented land.
Yes, yes,
Those
yes. There
little
you go.
hotels and get out of jail free.
Yes, yes.
I also want to commend you on the front cover of the book. Daniel Pink had something really cool to say about the book, and I had the enormous opportunity to meet Daniel Pink backstage last year at Carson Excel.
Oh,
And
cool.
so I was like, I really have to read that. I think it just eloquently stated the thesis and the foundation of the book as this: the rare book that will change whom you see in the mirror. We call
Mm.
that a mic drop here.
I like that. Thank you.
So was that, talk to us about like the net effect. We talked a little bit about the origin story of why you created the book. What is the change that you hope to
Mm,
create in
mm.
me and in Melanie. And we've got big shout out to Berta, Jackie, Jamie, Jennifer, Josh, Keena, like everyone here. What do you envision as a result of
Yeah.
us picking up this wonderful manuscript?
Um, yeah. Thank you for saying that. You know, it's a really good question because when I first started working on this topic, you know, the goal was to get people to, you know, make better decisions, if you will. And I realized that that's really not the goal. The goal is it's kind of twofold. One, it's to sort of close the gap between the things I want to do, the things I say I want to do, and what I actually do, right? So there's this, you know, behavioral scientists call this the intention behavior gap, right? So I intend to do this, I intend to eat healthier and, you know, be more patient with my kids and exercise more and save more, et cetera, and then I don't do it. So on the one hand, you know, the book starts where a lot of other books start, which is to like help close that gap. On the other hand, I think part of the goal, and this is a little bit harder to sort of like, you know, quantify, is to help people be more, sorry, this is going to sound like I'm like plugging this because this is, you know, an intentionally event, but to help people be more intentional uh, in the decisions that they make, especially with regards to the ones that impact themselves now and later. So, you know, I think it's easy to see the title of the book and like know something about this research and say, oh, the goal is to like do more for your future self. And like, of course, that's part of the goal. But also, so much of it is to like spread out, you know, well-being and contentment and happiness over time. So, and some of that means, you know, living for today, doing the things today that my future self will later look back on. Some of it means, well, maybe I should pull back a little bit so I have more resources later. But it's about creating sort of a harmony, if you will, between the sort of current self and the, you know, our eventual future selves. That's like to me like the real heart of the book. But that's, you know, that's like a lot harder to say in the like pithy one or two sentences on the inside flap.
We'll get Daniel and Pink on the next
Yeah,
call.
yeah, yeah. He could do
All
it better than
right.
me. Yeah, yeah.
I love it. Jackie already has a question, and I want to read that in just a second. But yeah, I would say that the genesis of just even just the word intentionally, big shout out to both our co-founders, Kelly Waldrick and Megan Richter, who just like, I think that this is a concept for the now. I see the
Mm,
word intention show up in so many different things. It's so relatable. And I like a lot of the anecdotal evidence that you also put in the book. I'm going to get to that in just a second. But here's Jackie's question. How
mm.
would you say that the core personality traits affect our ability to communicate well with our future selves and thus create a more successful pathway to future happiness and
Yeah,
contentment? Love
yeah.
that.
It's a really good question. So, you know, when you say the core personality traits, of course, you know, researchers talk about, you know, the big five, you know, openness to new experiences, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. So, you know, it's interesting because our ability to sort of relate to our future selves, it's related to some of those, but it's, you know, it's not as strong as you'd think necessarily because it's kind of its own thing. Like, you know, there's not enough research on this. My guess is that it's probably some combination of those different traits or whatnot. You know, one that stands out is conscientiousness, but even then, the relationship it's there. In other words, like as a researcher, I would say, well, it's got a sort of a small to medium, you know, connection correlation, if you will. Um, but but the way that I view it, and I think the way that other researchers would view it, is that those core personality traits don't necessarily impact the way that I relate or communicate with my future self. They're sort of another aspect of my personality. They may be related for some and maybe less related for others, but to the extent that those big five personality traits are sort of these innate things that, you know, we grow up with and that do change over time. I think the same could be said for the way that we relate to our future selves. Some of that is innate, some of it is sort of learned from the environment we grow up in, and some of it changes over time as we have new experiences and whatnot. So it's partly it's a great question that hasn't really been investigated by real research yet. So, you know, my answer is sort of, but I don't know necessarily.
So one of the things that I love to do is I'm both a visual learner and I'm an audio
Mm,
learner. And so when I started listening to my future self, I put the audio version on drove to work here at Intentionally. And you start out with a gripping story about Pedro Rodriguez Filo,
Yeah.
who I think really leans into the question that Jackie just asked. Like, are we the same? Like, we have a set of core
Mm,
personalities right now, right? Right, Hal? And
yeah.
then later on in life, we it's accretive. Some of those personality traits like intensify, and some of them we shed. But for those, for the people, for our book club members right now,
Yeah. Yeah.
thank you. Big shout out to you all. Kind of talk a little bit about that
Sure.
story and just share
Sure.
that, because you were like, you had me at hello.
Well, you first off, you have to buy the
Woo!
book to find out the ending. No, but so okay, so my sort of guilty pleasure, especially when I'm like washing dishes or like making the kids lunch, is to listen to these true crime podcasts. And it's like I like hesitate to admit it. I mean, I guess I feel like it's like obviously a big trend, but one of them I listen to religiously spotlighted this guy Pedro Rodriguez Filo, who was uh, it turned out he was Brazil's like most notorious serial killer. He was the actually I found this out later. He was the inspiration for Dexter, the TV show Dexter, where if you don't know that show, Dexter is a serial killer, but he only kills bad guys, right? So this is true for this guy Pedro as well. He like had killed dozens of people, but they're all like whatever. I'll leave that there. I don't want to go too far down the line. The interesting thing about this guy, and I'll make the story short, is that he's caught, he's put into jail, but there's this like limit in the Brazilian penal code at the time where you could only be jailed for up to 35 years. And so he's this notorious serial killer. He gets thrown into prison for 35 years and is there for 35 years, and then they don't know what to do with him because he's in his 60s and his term is up. So he eventually gets released, but he's a sort of totally changed. At some point while he was in prison, he had this sort of, moment where he said, if I can just make it out of this one period of time, I will never be violent again. And to his word, according to his word, that is what happened. He gets released. He's sort of this new person. He is like, wakes up at 5 every morning. He works out. He works at this bottling plant. He has these like inspirational speeches for like at-risk youth and so on. And I heard this and I thought, he's kind of an amazing and extreme example of somebody who started in one way and then became almost a different person. And so I did a lot of work to find him, and I ended up talking to him, and which was a crazy experience in and of itself. And one of the things that he said to me was that he almost doesn't even relate to the person he once was. That it was like he's like
Mm,
disgusted by that person. Now, of course, we have to take all of this with a grain of salt, and I admit that. But the reason that I started the book that way, and the reason that I think it's so interesting, is because there's something to the notion that we aren't just one person over time, and that we can change. And I know that we can all, I think people differ on this. Is he really different now? And it's really convenient for him to say that he's different, but from my read, and maybe I'm too naive or whatever you want to say, like certainly I would have gotten a beer with him.
wow.
And I don't know that, I would say that about other former serial killers, right? So, okay. Now I think part of, and this, I think this goes back to the question earlier from Jackie. It's like, it, it brings up this idea that of change over time, and I think the research says is that in some ways we change and in some ways we don't. And then and that we can also be sorry, I'm going to say this again. It sounds like I'm like an advertisement for you. We can be intentional about our change. I mean, to some extent, this is what therapy does. Anyway, that's a really long answer for your question, but
That's
that's
great.
the general idea. Yeah.
That's really great. I mean, I loved it. Again, like all of those like chemicals lighting up my brain. Throughout the book also too, you have specific examples of research that you conducted with like a lot of big banks around savings and retirement and all of that. And I love that Kevin has a fantastic question here. What he says is this: Hal, I coach retirees. Do you think people
Mm,
tend to stop trying to evolve into their future selves when they retire? In other words, do they get stuck in thinking of themselves as who they were and not who they can become?
that's a beautifully worded question. So I actually don't know the research on this. I think that if you were to sort of look, the most closely related thing out there suggests that people change as much in 10 years time. Over a period of 10 years, people change, and that doesn't matter if they're going from 30 to 40, 40 to 50, or 65 to 75, or whatever it is. So the point is that people do change over time. But one of the things that happens is that we don't see the change happening as much moving forward, which is this sort of funny little quirk where we recognize that we've changed from the past to the present, but then somehow think, I am who I am right now. Kevin, you sort of said stuck. I'm like fully baked. I am who I am. And the problem with that perspective is that it sort of ignores the possibility of growth and change. So I mean, I actually think, and I'm just taking a guess here, but it seems like part of what you might do and the value that you might add is to highlight that change can happen, whether you're, you know, 20 or whether you're 70. Of course, it may become harder, right? Certain habits and these are sort of surface level things, but behaviors can become harder to change in a way. But values, personality traits, those things can evolve. And I think, a coach or therapist can sort of help that process along.
Thank you. That's a great answer. We've got a lot of
Mm.
great questions. I want to launch a poll that's going to lead us into this like next theme of the idea of age progression. And so here is the question, ladies and gentlemen: true or false? Age progressed renderings of our current selves will cause us to allocate more resources to the future. And again, wow, you're going to love these results, Hal.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So,
Oh,
um,
100%. I'd like to read Josh's question and then have you reflect on the question and on Josh's question specifically. Okay. Thoughts, and thank you, Josh, for the question. Thoughts on the use of aging software to increase the connection to the future self.
yeah, so it's a great question. So this is, a line of research I've been involved in for a long time now. Others have as well. So early on, when we started sort of playing around with the ways that we could increase connection. The sort of theory behind this, by the way, like just to um, not to speak to the answer right away, but the theory behind this was if you want to enhance connection, make the sort of target more vivid and more emotional, right? In the same way that charities get us to get more connected to charity recipients by making them more vivid, telling a story, showing a picture, and so on. And so we thought, all right, well, let's try to do this. Let's make the future self more vivid and more visual. So early on, we used it was so it seemed high tech at the time, but it seems so low tech now. We worked with graphic artists and we used these sort of different packages we could get and showed people what they would look like when they're older. It wasn't bad, but it certainly wasn't great. As a side note, my wife and I recently were cleaning out some boxes that came from my parents, and there was some printouts in there, printouts of my early days of doing this stuff. And I found a photo, and it was me. It was supposed to be me in my 50s. I'm in my mid 40s now, and my wife, without thinking about it, was like, "Huh, the technology wasn't that good then, because I think you look older now than you were predicted to look."
Don't you love
In that
that?
sense, so I was like, thank you so much. So okay, so here's what we do know. These sorts of tools have been used to get people to do more. So in lab settings, it's gotten people to allocate more to their future selves and act more ethically. Um, we have a paper where we put this into the field and found that when people are exposed to their future selves, they're a little bit more likely to actually make a contribution to a retirement account. Now, early on, one of the things we're finding is that the mechanism is that it increases this sort of connection to the future self. Um, there are a lot of open questions here, though, because what we haven't yet done is the like larger scale studies to say, like, for whom does this really work? And who puts up their hands and says, like, I don't want to see this. There's this like TikTok trend right now, of course, with the aging software. That's amazing. It's like it is so far and away, better than what I was doing in the early days. And Snapchat has one too, and there's other apps, and they're really fantastic because they like physiologically do a lot of what the aging
Mm.
process does. So it looks real. And watching the TikTok videos, and this is not a controlled study, but watching the TikTok videos of people using this, I mean, some of them are moving,
Mm.
where people are sort of reflecting on how they want to change the way they spend their time. Some of them are funny. Some of them are like, one woman has this conspiracy theory that if it ages you too young, it means that you die early in your life. And it's this whole it right, exactly. It's TikTok. But I think, the the question, the sort of like next generation question is going to be who is going to be benefiting from this the most? Who will sort of like react negatively to these things? And then, Josh asked about sort of like increasing connection. Of course, I'm really most interested not just in the connection, but also like changing outcomes. And so that's the other thing to look at. If you want to sort of like pair these things with an outcome, you've got to be in a situation where the outcome is sort of easily like the ability to make a change is there. By the way, one last thing, which is that one of the European banks just started this campaign where you type in like, what's an ideal day look like in retirement? And then you upload a photo of yourself, and it uses AI tools to like in a second paint a picture of that ideal day in
Oh.
retirement. So like the example I saw is this woman says like, I want to run through a field of poppies with my 3 dogs. And she's like, I think probably in her 30s or 40s. And like, there's this amazing picture of her like with this like huge grin, and like one dog's in front of her and 2 dogs are behind her. And there's this just like this field of flowers, and she's totally happy. They claim this is I think it's ING. They claim that, there's a 300% increase in interest in their retirement products. I mean, again, it's not like a controlled study, so I don't know, but that would be the type of thing I think could be like really valuable if done right.
Yeah, we have a lot of financial advisors on the call right now on in the meeting. And I wonder, like, there's a lot of financial planning software technologies out there using goals approached methodology to encourage,
Hmm.
savings and great behaviors from our future selves, like, or, a great outcome for our future selves
Right.
based on behavior right now. I wonder, as you were explaining that, I wonder if even the graphic of
Yeah.
this, like, of that could be informed, like something so little that when I go into my app and I'm on my phone and then I'm reminded of me and the poppy field, like I would light up like that. I would
Yeah.
emotionally connect to that, right?
It's a really interesting idea. I mean, if I were to like, really think deeply about that, the one thing I'd want to do is to like make sure it changed, right? And that like it
Yeah.
got fresh and novel, because I bet you like, at first that would move the needle or make a difference. But over time, it's like now it's like I can't even tell you what the background photo on my phone is because I haven't changed it in a while. Because it's just become part of the background, right?
Right.
And so, if it could somehow update or change, I mean, I know I could set that right now so that my phone would just like constantly put up pictures of the kids or whatever. That if we could do that with those sorts of future images when I log into my account infrequently, ideally
Mm.
infrequently, so I don't change too much, that could be really, I think it'd be really interesting sort of test, if you will.
Uh, I'm going to get to another question in just a minute here, but there was a part in the book where you talked about Jane Fonda and
Yeah.
and VR. And I was like, wow. I was like, I would love to have been there for that, been a fly on the wall for that. Were you working with Jane in those types of like image progression studies?
Yeah, so the original image progression studies, we weren't just using this software, but we were actually using a virtual reality immersive environment. So, this is like you've probably seen the pictures of this sort of thing. It's kind of like what Oculus does now, but I mean, this is even more immersive because basically well, I don't know if I should say that, but basically what you would do, we would use this room and people would put goggles on and there'd be cameras and people have little light sensors on. And when you walk around, you're just walking around this like totally boring blank room, but in your goggles you see whatever the virtual reality world is, but it feels like you're actually there. And that's where we sort of first showed people their future selves. They would walk around, they'd see this mirror, and then they would come face to face with their future self and they'd have this conversation with them. um, uh, Jane Fonda was working on a book at the time about um, I think it was called like the third act, and it was about sort of that, like, I mean, it's really related to Kevin's question earlier about like sort of change in that like last third of life, the retirement years and whatnot. Um, and she had come to campus to sort of talk to some researchers, and I was one of them, and we showed her this sort of virtual world. And it was wild because one of the demonstrations is that you put people like to show them the power of virtual reality. There's this room and there's this like giant pit, but when you look down, there's this like bottomless pit. It's like actually kind of scary. And then there's a plank that goes across it. And then in the room, it's literally just a regular room, but we put down a 2x4, like just a board, and we say, okay, walk across the plank. And to the person there, feels like you're walking on an actual plank. And I
Mm.
mean, there's something funny about watching people do this because some people are like, I can't do it, because it looks like you're gonna fall in the virtual world. Anyway, it's just to demonstrate how strong virtual reality is. And Jane did it, and she was like incredible. She like, I mean, this was
Mm.
how long ago, and she more or less ran across it. Like I was sort of shadow. You always have to shadow the person in case they fall and get freaked out. And she just was like zoomed across. Anyway,
Like a
um,
boss, Jane
like a
Fonda, like a
boss,
boss.
or
Exactly.
like
I love it.
1980s, like
Yeah.
what was it? Workout videos, I guess, came in handy there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love this next question. A big shout out to Linda Wittich, who's on who's been a great member of our book club, and she's going to get a copy of the book soon. She's curious about the people around her or the people around us in general. So how much? Let me read her question. But curious about how much you feel the people you surround yourself with, i.e., spouse, family, colleagues, influence the future versus
Hmm.
how much of the future is defined by yourself and self-reflection.
Future you, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, and I think it's a really good question, right? So there's a couple ways to answer this. So the first thing is, we know that the self is not just sort of this siloed entity, right? We are um, intimately connected to the people around us, and our concept of self includes those people around us. Actually, and there's cultural differences here too, where people who grow up in sort of the Western world see the self as more separate, but people in Eastern cultures, there's a lot of sort of fluidity here, but oftentimes Eastern cultures include more of the self include other people more in the concept of the self. But this is this question about, when I think of my own future self, um, how much is it defined by those around us?
mm,
This is not yet researched, but my hunch is that as we go through life and get older, it becomes more and more the case that my future self is more and more defined by the people around us, right? Early on, if we're not partnered up or we don't have kids, and I know these are sort of like traditional markers, but they're also markers that change the way that the future looks. Early on, without those, everything is abstract. But as you go through life and as connections become tighter, I think at that point it can become more likely that the future self is defined by both a combination of your own self reflection as well as the people around you and what they're doing. And but again, there's no there's no empirical research on this. So it would be, I mean, I think it's like a fascinating question to examine because it also starts leading into these other questions of how do I impact people as they get older in terms of, do I talk to them just about their self or about the sort of community of people that are included in that concept of the self?
Yeah, it
It's a
was
wonderful question. Yeah.
such a great question. How many times have we heard that we are a product of the five people that we are,
Right,
are,
exactly.
are closest to? Like, we can all recite that. Here's a follow-up question for the age recognition. And
Mm,
again, Ricky, thank you so much. Great to see you on today's call as well. Was there any research that people who save money for retirement already activate the recognition portions of their brain without the facial aging software?
yeah. So
Great,
this is
great question.
such a great question. Okay, so let me see if I can speak to it. So one of my earlier studies tried to basically understand how we view our future selves. And so the thinking here, the theory here is that our future selves sort of are thought of as if they are other people, and we can have sort of different levels of connection with them. And so the idea that our future self is another person is sort of a strange idea. Um, but I wanted to investigate this, and we, my colleagues and I actually turned to neuroimaging because it turns out one of the like findings you see again and again in neuroimaging is that the brain can tell what's me and what's not me. I mean, that makes sense in a way, but to like social neuroscientists, this is like a big finding. This is 20 years ago. In other words, like put me in a scanner, have me think about myself or have me think about Tina, and there's going to be more activity in this one portion of my brain when I think about myself compared to when I think about you. I'll know that difference starts getting smaller and smaller if I think about somebody who's like a close loved one. Like if I were to think about my kid or my spouse or my mom, like then all of a sudden the
Mm,
difference is a little smaller. In part because it goes back to the Linda's question too. Like those people are like a little bit more closely connected to the self. Okay, I'm trying to make this not like a huge setup, but what we found is that when you put people in the scanner and you have them think about themselves now or themselves in the future, in fact, the brain activity that comes about when you think of the future self looks more like the brain activity that comes about when you think about another person. So it like on in a brain level, the future self is another seems like another person. All right, that's the first part. The second part is that there's differences between people on how big that gap is in the brain. So for some people, the future self looks like a total stranger in the brain. For some people, it's like a lot more similar. All right. So then we bring people back into the lab 2 weeks later, and we ask them to do this savings task. We basically it's like a classic thing you do in research where you say like, "Hey, would you rather have $10 today or wait 4 weeks and have $20?" These sorts of questions. And you give them a series of questions, and you pick one randomly, and you pay out whatever their choice is. All right. The thing we found there was that the people who had the most sort of similarity in the brain between their current self and their future self, they were the ones who are most willing to wait for a larger reward.
mm,
In other words, that's not a perfect measure of saving for retirement, but it's sort of a proxy because saving for the future is all about not spending now and waiting for later, right? So I hope that wasn't too long-winded. You're like asking, a professor to talk about research, so I get excited. So, but the very short answer is, yes, there is sort of some research that speaks to that, but it's not like 100% match to your question.
Al, we want you to keep on talking. This day couldn't last enough. One of the goals, again, how I started out the book club is for you to impart learning on us. And
Mm,
my whole thing is always like, okay, give me the cheat sheet, like tell me what to do. And
yeah, sure, sure.
the way that your future self is organized, by the way, there is like a summation after each chapter, which is
Yeah.
fantastic. So you get those like kind of learning, those reinforcements for learning. But I also like the use of stories throughout the book, and that the use of metaphors and the way that you talk about bridging and getting to our future selves is akin to travel, specifically the mistakes that we made. And I
Right, right.
really identified with that. So you call it almost like time travel, these ideas of like time traveling mistakes, missing our flight, packing the wrong clothes, just poor trip planning. Like, what were we
Yeah.
talking about going in that kind of trip of the world? What if you could be like prescriptive in
Yeah.
your advice to us, number one, for ourselves, and number two, for us working with other people
Right,
who also
right.
to make their lives better?
So when you say, sorry, just to be clear, when you say if I
Yeah,
could be prescriptive, can you, and
sure.
sorry, and by the way, I also saw there's a really interesting question from Kina in the chat, like not in the Q&A, and I want to make sure we get to that too. But go ahead. Sorry. When you say
Yeah.
prescriptive, you mean in terms of overcoming?
Overcoming procrastination was a big theme in the book.
Hmm.
I was like, oh,
Hmm.
yes, thank you, Hal, for writing that section. Right. And then like, what's the big takeaway here that we can just learn from my future selves? There were so many different things that we could do, but I mean, as like, hey, if you're going to improve your life right now and
Right,
your
right,
connection to your future self,
right,
do this. And maybe that same kind of philosophy applies to us financial advisors working with other clients.
right. Of course. Okay. So I mean, the main thing that you can do is to buy my book. I'm just kidding. Okay, sorry. Sorry, that was a dumb joke. Okay,
It's
so
great.
um, the way that I think about it is that there's sort of three buckets of um, solutions, right? And so, and I, of course, this is the last, I don't know, whatever it is, half of the book or the last third of the book. So the first bucket is to try to connect more to our future selves. The second bucket is to try to make, um, well, let me just speak to it a little bit. So this is particularly true for big long-term decisions, and especially the ones where I make a decision and then I can sort of let things ride. So this is, I think, really relevant for financial advisors where, most people aren't like constantly changing their portfolio. Most people aren't constantly changing their paycheck allocation or whatever it is. But, if I make that decision once a year or every, when there's a big event in my life, then I kind of let it ride. It's automatic over time. And so that's the moment where it's really important to
Mm,
connect to our future selves. And so concretely, like for instance, I talk about a number of different things in the book, but one of them concretely that I really like, an exercise that I think is super relevant, is writing a letter to your future self and then writing a letter back from your future self. Um, the second part is really key because if I just write a letter to my future self, I'm still sort of just anchored on right now. But if I write one back, now I'm really stepping into the shoes of that person. And I'm thinking about how do the decisions I'm making today, how am I going to feel about those later on? So I think this is a really useful exercise for the big decisions. And for what it's worth, um, I did a collaboration with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and we put together this, like, for lack of a better term, worksheet. It's called the Future Self Tool. That's meant to help advisors and educators work with their clients. It is totally free. You know, all I get from you downloading that is the knowledge that hopefully it's helping you help clients, right? And it works you through the letters and how to do like these. So some of the exercises are uh, very low tech, like writing a letter to and from. They're all low tech, but some are more involved and some are less involved. Um, so if you, I mean, maybe I can share it with you later, but if you literally just Google CFPB Future Self Tool, it should pop up.
yeah, we're
Um,
going to, Melanie, if you could get that link and put it in the chat for us, that would be fantastic.
yeah, it should be pretty easy to find. If not, let me know. So that's one really concrete way to increase those connections to the future self. The second sort of bucket of things that I talk about in the book is it's this recognition that there's this version of me that wants to do things the right way. Like I want to save, or like my personal thing is like I don't want to, like I always snack at night, and then it's like if I eat too much chocolate, it's like I don't sleep as well. But it's like this bad pattern, and then but I'm tired at night, and I like kind of get a little hungry, so I eat it. So there's this recognition that I want to do things one way. I want like my future self to look back and say like I did it the right way, but then there's this like middle self who like is gonna screw it up. That's the guy at night who stands in front of the pantry and like eats his kids' candy. Um, and so this sort of second bucket of strategies is all about putting guardrails on. What can we do? What sort of commitment devices, which has been these have been written about in other books for sure, but commitment devices are super interesting because what they do is they try to help constrain our behavior so that we do more of the things we want to do. From the lens of present and future selves, I find them really interesting because the present self has to decide something that
Mm,
will be painful enough to deter some sort of behavior, but not so painful that I don't adopt it altogether. Um, so that's the other thing that I like to talk about. And then the third sort of bucket is this recognition that like all of these sort of decisions over time, it's always the present self who has to sacrifice.
mm,
Um, you
exactly.
know, right? Like if I'm like not gonna splurge on, if I'm gonna get the like healthy salad for dinner, like okay, I don't get to enjoy the like steak. That's like kind of a silly example, right? But my future self, he gets to feel better and like his cholesterol goes down and like, maybe he's fitter. Um, if I want to save more, it's like my future self benefits, but like I'm the one who has to like not spend as, or get the like lower end car or TV or whatever it is. Um, and that's kind of, I mean, for lack of a better phrase, it's like kind of shitty to be in that situation. It's like being in a
Right.
sorry, it's like being in like a bad relationship where you're always the one sacrificing for your partner. And so one of the strategies is to figure out how do I, how do I make the sacrifices, quote unquote sacrifices, easier to undertake? And I talk about a number of strategies in the book there. One of them is a great one called temptation bundling. Maybe you've even talked
Yes,
about
I
it on your
love
right. So
that.
that is like that's just one example, but one of the other things I talk about is really coupling bad with good. And this is also some of my own research in the clinical therapy space where patients who experience both positive and negative emotions in a session show greater improvement with coping later on rather than just one emotion or the other, because like the positive allows you to see like confront the negative and get some insight, and so you can apply that and think about how that applies outward. The bottom line of all this is that as we're sort of navigating these little challenges, what are the different ways that I can lessen the sacrifice, make it feel a little bit not so bad? Those are the sort of like big prescriptive things, but maybe in this group, especially folks who are interested in the sort of advising space, the future self tool and trying to figure out how to get people to connect to the future self, that may be most relevant.
That's great advice. I want to get to Keena's question in the chat because also too, big shout out Keena Pettijohn. Oh, I love this question too. At what age is it too late to change your future self?
It's such a good question. So I look, I'll start from the outset by saying like I'm probably naturally an optimistic person.
Mm,
So my answer is going to be colored by that. I'm also, look, you brought up Dan Pink before. I'm very influenced by him. One of the, this isn't his quote, but it's something he pointed to in his most recent book, The Power of Regret. One of the things he said, there's this old saying, um, the best time to plant the tree was 20 years ago, right? And the second best time is today. And he talked about that in the context of regret and making changes in our lives, and he sort of used it as as a way to sort of open up the conversation about how regret can actually power us to change our behavior. I think it's relevant with future selves because I don't think it's ever I don't think it's ever too late, right? To the extent that there's going to be an older version of you, um, it's not too late to plan. Now, like, of course, from a concrete perspective, like if we want to take advantage of compound interest in a financial space, so it's better to save earlier than later, and so on. And yet, most people would say, well, but if you just don't do anything, like you're still going to be in a worse position later on. And that's just a very specific, narrow instance of of saving, but I think in many other domains, um, yeah, I really don't think it's too late because uh, like we are always changing, and that was one of the big sort of takeaways that I got in writing the book is that it's not like we're this sort of static entity or that we somehow become fully baked at some point. Um, yeah,
Yeah, and this whole idea that we're always changing, the way that I really loved how you articulated it in the book, again, we're telling all these stories. The first one being about the letters that you were talking about, that when we look
yeah,
back,
yeah.
right? When we're here, we don't really think like we've changed in the last 10 years, but actually that letter kind of being the benchmark and looking forward is and looking back. And I also love the guacamole
Yeah.
and ink story, which I thought was so powerful because look, there's a tattoo convention not too far from here. And I think like that's a fascinating story looking at like the themes of regret. Am I this still the same person? I thought that was a really cool story. I don't know how you found these like all amazing stories, but I think that's definitely one for the here and now because you see so many people with tattoos all over their body.
Yeah, I mean that story is like that was one of my favorites from the book. I'm happy to talk
Yeah.
about that for a minute too.
Yeah,
So
I would love for you to
um
spend time. It was great story.
so this, I'd come across the story. This guy, but I guess it was in the night. No, it must have been in the 90s. He was in San Francisco and he was like working at the bottom of the hill, this little like sort of music venue there. And he'd have a day off every week and he'd walk around and like explore the city. And one of those days he was in the Mission. I don't know how many people are in San Francisco, but it's like there's a lot of little Mexican restaurants there, little burrito spots. And he was in the market for a tattoo. He hadn't gotten one ever before. He wanted one. And he walked by this little spot called Casa Sanchez. And there was the logo of the restaurant, which was a little boy with a big floppy hat on a corn cob rocket ship. And there was a big sign next to it, and it said, "Tattoo me on your body and get free food for the rest of your life." And like, if I walked by that, I would have been like, "No, thanks." And he was like, "This is it." And like, went in. He tries a burrito, likes it enough, and gets the tattoo. Um, And I read about this because it was like something like, 25 years later, like I think, or 20 years later, like some magazine did a story about it. I mean, the funny thing, by the way, is that the restaurant closed and like a Greek spot opened, and they were like, "Sure, we'll give you Greek food," but he doesn't really like Greek food, so he like still, um, they still like gave him this free food, but he whatever. Um, but I was really curious. Like when I interviewed him, the reason I had interviewed him was to ask him about like, was this an example of something you regretted? Like, what would you tell your past self? Like, I went into it thinking that way. And when we talked, it was like a very different conversation that I had anticipated. And I mean, he's just the nicest guy. And so my first question is like, did you get a bunch of other tattoos? Like I was like, well, maybe this was just like one of many. And he was like, guess how many tattoos I have? And I was like, I don't know, 1 million. And he was like, one. Like I have one tattoo, it's that one. And I was like, all right, well, did you regret it? And he was like, not for an instant. And I was so interested in that. I was like, okay, well, how come? And he said, he basically said, he's like, I was in my 20s then. I'm in my 50s now. He's like, I don't know if this is still his job because when I talked to him about a year and a half ago, he was like a blogger for ESPN. He had like much more traditional hours. Like
Mm.
occasionally goes to the bottom of the hill, but like I mean, like you can't stay up to 2 or 3 in the morning every night, right? And he was like, I am very different now from who I was when I was in my 20s, but like I also still have some of those same qualities that he had that earlier me. And like his quote was that like when I look in the mirror and I see that tattoo, it like instantly connects me back to that person, to that version of me. And part of what I loved about that was that it was like I think it highlights, I mean, this is exactly, you brought it up, this idea that like it highlights that like we can change. over time, and that we sort of continue to change over time, and that if we think that we're going to be one thing, that may not be all that accurate of a reflection of the reality of growth and adulthood and life. And, on the contrary, if we sort of recognize that we can make plans, but the plans can change, our lives can change, we can have unexpected things happen to us with health or money or relationships or whatever. But if we think that things are going to be this way and they go this way, that's when things are going to be not good. But if we say, okay, we're going to plan for it to go this way, but they go this way, all right. So that's what happens. And I think I feel like he really embodied that perspective in a way that I absolutely loved.
It was a fantastic story. It was something that was so relatable and so interesting. I love it.
Yeah.
It's almost like he's got like his own letter like tattooed, like that point in time, like preserved in that fashion. I never even thought about it like that. And yeah, his response was mind blowing. I was so happy that you included it in the book. I was also
Yeah.
a big shout out, Kevin. Thank you. I love what Kevin said in the chat also too, talking about the fact that he can attest that it's never too late to change our future selves. And then we just have to have a growth mindset, right?
Yeah. I mean, I love that perspective too. Um, Carol Dweck was one of my sort of mentors. I worked with her in grad school, and I was her teaching assistant for a couple of years. Who's the researcher behind all the growth mindset work. And there's a lot of nuance there, by the way. I should say, there's a lot of, if you were to dig into the literature now, you can see like the effects of that are stronger for some groups than others. But there's a bigger point, which is sort of recognizing or believing that there could be growth may be particularly helpful for segments of the population that need that like could grow the most. And I think it's a great point that Kevin raises there.
We have 3 more minutes, and I just want to make sure to get this in because I love the way that you ended the book too. And so a lot of us on the in the meeting right now know Carl Richards. And it was
Oh
so
yeah.
glad too how that you included that that you ended the book like that. I'll let you kind of tell the story, but I also thought like that was just a poignant reminder of the fact that this connection with our future selves is so much more important. I don't think we give it enough intentional thought, but after the book, I certainly now am thinking about my future self, and I'm really loving my future self in a way that I never have before. If you know, you know.
I love that. I appreciate that, Tina. Yeah, Carl has been so wonderful to talk to. And one of the things that he had said in one of his columns, I think, was that we spend or maybe I don't remember. He either wrote this down or he said it to me. One of the things he'd said was, we spend so much time talking about saving for tomorrow, but that's only half the equation, or that's only one side of the coin. And the other one is that we spend for tomorrow too. And one of the things that I thought I really took home from that was that there's ways to sort of live in the present and like celebrate the present that don't just make the present better, but also, I know we mentioned this sort of in passing earlier on, but also make the future better, because ultimately that's the version who will look back at the things that we've done today. And I that was the end of the book for me. My kids are now 4 and 7. When I was working on the book, I guess they were 2 and 5 or whatever. And it really hammered home something which I don't think I'd fully appreciated, which is like it's so easy to miss the present,
Right.
and like convince ourselves that we're doing
Mm.
something right because we're living we're doing something for the future. And um, I, that was such a good reminder that it makes sense sometimes to kind of lean in and celebrate stuff so that we can um, look back as well and enjoy it right now.
Well, we are better
Yeah.
off for it. Our lives are better off for it. Yeah, that whole idea of like, don't be too invested in the future, but don't be 100% invested in the present right now either, kind of find that middle. And again,
The middle ground.
your
Yeah.
future self offers a lot of fantastic strategies. I found the book was also too like very approachable, very relatable, and a story for the now. So Hal
Thank
Hershfield,
you.
congratulations. This is the first of many books. Like I told you, I was like, we're going to be able to say we knew Hal Hershfield when, because I think that this is many in many series understanding a little bit more of who you are and your innate curiosity. Thank you
Thank
so,
you.
so much. We thank you. I want to thank everyone for their kindness in the chat today and their questions. And again, the generous nature of everyone's time, including yours, Hal.
Thank you. Thank you, Tina. This is a really fun conversation, and it wouldn't be as much fun as it was if it weren't for such great questions. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, everyone, have a fantastic rest of your day. And if you need anything from us, please reach out. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.